Did we get the recording announcement? There we go. Okay. Uh, Good evening, everyone. Well, good evening for me, good afternoon for others. Thank you for joining us and welcome to our ongoing series of science teaching and learning book chats. My name is Doug Larkin, and I am the chair, outgoing chair of the AERA Science Teaching and Learning SIG. We're glad you're all with us today. Before we get started with our guest, I just wanted to announce our next book chat. It will be on Tuesday, February 25th, and this will be when Dr. Lauren Madden. We're going to keep the climate change education theme going. Joins us to talk about her new book, Climate Change Education Across Disciplines, K-12 at New Jersey and Beyond. And this one is near and dear to my heart. New Jersey was the first state in the U.S. to have climate change standards, not just in science, but across language arts and mathematics as well. And so Lauren will join us to talk about that. It is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Kelley Lê. For over 15 years, Dr. Lê has been in the educational field as a high school science educator, instructional coach, and educational leader. She's currently the executive director of the Los Angeles-based nonprofit Grades of Green, where she works with an incredible team of change makers working closely with schools, communities, and industry partners to advance climate and environmental literacy and action. She was previously the inaugural executive director of the UC-CSU Environmental Climate Change Literacy Project, ECCLPS, director of the UC Irvine Science Project, and program designer, field supervisor, as well as course lecturer for the UCI Cal Teach Science and Mathematics program. She frequently develops and facilitates programs in the areas of climate change education, environmental literacy, science and equity, nanoscience, and the next generation science standards. Her current book that we're going to be talking about tonight is Teaching Climate Change for Grades 6 through 12, Activating Science Teachers to Take on the Climate Crisis Through NGSS, recently released in its second edition. So welcome, Kelley, and thank you for joining us to talk about your book.
Thanks for having me, Doug, and it's so great to see familiar faces in the crowd today. So hi, everyone.
And I'm going to pin you to the first screen here so everybody sees. All right, add pin on the first screen. Okay, there we are. Okay, well, welcome everyone. So if we could, I'd like to start by asking you to just give a brief description of your book for those who may not have read it yet.
Yeah, so again, thanks for joining me today and allowing for me to have this chat. I think for this book in its second edition, I'm really excited about it because since I wrote the first book, which came out in 2021, the landscape has changed so much for climate education and climate education research specifically. And this book initially was about my work with federal agencies, national agencies, and then also about 50 nonprofit local Los Angeles agencies in thinking about how to support secondary science teachers in taking on climate change during a time when we were mandated to teach about climate change, but was offered essentially no support to doing so. In California at that time, I held a wide variety of roles, as you have heard, but I remember feeling incredibly frustrated as a high school and nanoscience and chemistry teacher. And I was definitely one of those teachers that went to every professional development, every conference, anything that I could do to support my students. I was that person to show up to make sure that I had as much knowledge as possible to take this on. But then when the NGSS rolled out, essentially there was no funding for our school district to send us to professional development or even conferences, et cetera. And I grew up and went to school in inner city Los Angeles. So I'm a first generation scholar myself. And so going back and teaching in my own community, I found it really difficult to find the support that I needed. And I was asking so many questions like, as a chemistry teacher, what is it that I need to know to even teach this well? Where do I then go get that information? How do I get the information needed to teach it in a way that is directly relevant to my students in the classroom so that it's not one more topic or that it's not in addition to the hundreds of standards, essentially the bullet points that we had to cover in the California science teaching standards prior to NGSS, right? There was just so many questions and I couldn't find answers. And then I went off to pursue my doctoral work through UCLA's program. And when I had an opportunity to research more about one particular topic that I felt would be meaningful for this community, it was to think about ways to support secondary science teachers in tackling this in a culturally relevant and responsive way. And hence the work then began 3 years of interviewing, networking, getting to know any effort that was out there available to teachers to learn about, teach about, gain resources from, etc. And at the end of it all, I published that dissertation and I thought, who's going to read 300 pages? Who's going to read 300 pages to actually do this in the way that is, we know, meaningful and directly relevant to students, that activates their agency beyond science for just content? How do I do this in a way that allows for them to ignite that passion that I know is already within, that I have learned from all of these incredible experts in the field? So I thought, the intention of this first book was really something that was born out of the dissertation work, a resource, a guide for teachers to be able to walk alongside, my journey, but then also learn from what I have experienced and what others have gracefully imparted on me at that point, to then be able to help them with a starting point. And what I realized is that practitioner lens informed with the research aspect of it, because I had to go through that dissertation process, helped me to understand, how a theory of action and a theory of change influences how teachers operate, even if we don't have the words to describe it that way. Um, and so the book starts off with helping teachers to understand and to call out their beliefs and their values in relation to how they teach in a classroom and how that permeates all of their decision making. And starting from that point, I have found running professional development programs, studying those same programs, working with others, etc. We've had more success in supporting teachers starting at that point than just jumping straight into, here's climate science, here's how you integrate. Because if you have a teacher in front of you that doesn't quote unquote believe in the science of climate change, or it's too political to talk about, or they can't even mention the name in some of these states, etc., then they won't even begin. So we start from a place of understanding what they feel is most valuable in a classroom and helping them to understand that their values are reflected in what they decide to omit or what they decide to include in their curriculum as well. And so long journey, as you can hear, to get to this point. But in short, it's a practitioner's guide to taking this on in meaningful ways that helps to activate student agency.
Well, thanks. Yeah, my second question is what made you want to write this? And I think you've covered that um, a great deal. The next question I have is about that theory of action, because that's something that really stood out to me. And it comes up in in chapter 2, I think, where you're talking about how scientific knowledge is generated, right? And understanding what science is. And so there's some of that stuff about, the nature of the scientific enterprise, and it's not just the scientific method. I mean, I appreciated that part. I wonder if we could get into a little bit more, and you started down that road, and I want to walk down it with you a little bit. Your own theory of action around climate change education,
Mhm.
right? Like, because it's woven into this book in a lot of different ways, and there's so many entry points. But I wonder if it's something um, that you can share with us, right? Like, so when we look at we get past the part about being overwhelmed, and maybe we never get past that part, right? But like,
Yes.
um, there's new sources of evidence every day. Um, but how do you think about what climate change education, and I was writing to you earlier about the climate change teacher education piece of this, right? But let's just talk about climate change education. How do you think about change? Like, how do you think about how that situation you described as a teacher, where not having resources or needing to go do a lot of that inventing for yourself? How do you think about how that situation changes.
Yeah, and I mean, we could go on and on about why teachers attend probably thousands of professional development and professional learning across their careers, only to probably adopt like a handful.
I think
And
there's a viral theory of action that's
yeah,
incorrect, but that it holds sway. Like if I go to this professional development, I'm allergic to the word turnkey, right? Like I take up this practice and now I bring it back and I virally spread it to my whole faculty. Like that rarely happens, except with like how many
It
copies.
rarely happens. And truthfully, it happens really well. And this is what I was kind of trying to get to in the earlier discussion. When we understand fully, and by we, I mean the teacher first has to understand fully, and then the professional development designer and or researcher designing interventions in place have to understand fully what those beliefs and values are for that educator. Because oftentimes when it's a top-down mandate, like in California, when we were going through this experience, it was already adopted in our state that we had to teach climate change. We didn't have a choice. But because it was so top down, there was no support in the operationalizing of that mandate. And so everybody just kind of ran all over the place. And then you had some people who thought, this too shall pass. I've seen this before. And then you had a whole group of people that said, yeah, I'm not sure I'm going to do anything with this, and you can't make me do anything with this. And then you had other groups that were like, I won't be the first to do that, but I won't be the last either. So there's so many trains of thinking, but at the same time, when you're thinking about what a teacher takes on, it has to start from what is it that they believe about their students' capacity, and what do they believe about the system of schooling as a whole and the role of schooling. So when I write this book, I think I ease into it because I'm well aware that this is maybe not the norm of how teachers approach what schools can be, that they can be organizations of change for the community, that they can be repositioned as organizations that are active in helping to unveil with students the issues that the students are facing, but also be a safe space to explore solutions to those issues with students. I understand that there are some schools like way ahead of the fold that are doing great work with that, but then there are also some schools that, like I said, I went to Title I and then I went back to teach in Title I for the majority of my career. The everyday um, challenges of even just keeping up with a system that has so many so many tasks in place, challenges in place, sometimes that's not possible. But I think what we have to remember, and this is how I'm operating, is remembering that schools are capable of being those organizations of change, so long as we start focusing on the individuals that make up that system that can change and pressure that system. But I feel like when we put the onus on the individual, when we say it's a teacher's job and responsibility alone to do this, I don't think that that's the right approach. Because again, working with thousands of teachers now, there's so many reasons for why a teacher will not do this or won't do this or is hesitant or may do this, right? But at the same time, if we don't take that systems thinking approach to supporting teachers to be able to do this well, I feel like then you get these climate champions in schools that are one-offs. And then when they leave, that initiative leaves with them. Or what they've catalyzed in that school, right? No longer catches fire, so to speak. I shouldn't say that because I'm in LA right now, but I don't know of a better metaphor. It essentially doesn't catch as quickly as it should. Um, but there's just so many challenges that we can acknowledge with the system. But where I'm operating from is first starting with that teacher in one, what are their beliefs and values? What are the spheres of influences that they can identify and leverage and activate to get this going, so that they are not the only one as at their school as a climate champion? And then understanding, and this was something I was trying to do with my previous organization, understanding what capacity. That's what I was always curious about. At what capacity would I have to work with a school with an interdisciplinary, intersectional approach? Would it then be self-sustaining, sufficient, and um, uh, uh, serving as a catalyst for that school to move forward without me?
Mm.
Because then I'm building the school's capacity to be that organization of change. I don't think we have answers to that yet. I don't know if the answer to that is all 100 science teachers in the department need to be teaching this for it to be effective as an approach, or if it's no, actually we found that say 25% of the department just needs to start, and then from there there are other approaches to getting it to start within other departments, right? I That's something I was always curious about in terms of building school capacity, right?
Well, I think a good analog for that, just I mean, my brain is going in a couple different directions, but a good analog for that is the way that students themselves, particularly in middle schools, catalyzed the growth of gay-straight alliances in schools, right? A lot of it came from the teacher, from the students finding that one teacher who was going to be that, that one person who could say, yes, this is an organization that can happen at this school. So sometimes it's an N of one, but that's not that's a limited source of change that then hopefully becomes a well that, they keep going back to.
And
Um,
I'll also mention, like when I said it earlier, I think it also starts with how teachers are thinking about their students' capacity, and and knowing who their students are. I think in my circle now, in the academic circles that I've been in, there's just language that's used, approaches that are accepted, but I can confidently say, given that I've been through many different school districts now and then connected pretty much like across the United States, concepts like funds of knowledge, understanding teachers' power dynamics in a classroom, and leveraging that knowledge to advance students' abilities, their knowledge, et cetera, in specific ways is not common. Although I heard it more when I was in higher education. And again, just because a teacher doesn't know the words doesn't mean that they're not doing it. They
right.
might not just have the language to describe it, but it's just like environmental injustice, right? Which is something I mentioned in the book as well. With our students, with our teachers, even ourselves, like, I mean, I'm in Los Angeles right now, and the first week of the fire, just because I knew better and I taught chemistry and we talk a lot about particulate matter and human health impacts. And then I have this new role now where years of learning about studying climate impacts, et cetera. I knew how to protect my family better because I was well informed. But when the school districts are saying, hey, you can't really see outside and the air is red or black or brown or what have you, and it smells really bad, it's completely safe for you to be back in school where there's no ventilation, where there's no circulation of clean air. We don't even have air filters. But yes, come on back because we need the ADA money. I feel like that's the point in which the student, the teacher, the parent, etc. They might not have the words to say like, I know something is wrong here and this is exactly what's wrong, but they can feel it and they can see it. And I feel like the same goes when you're thinking about teachers. Like we might not have the language to describe that we honor students' funds of knowledge in a specific way, but we know it when we see it because we're seeing success for how students engage. And we're seeing success for how students then want to show up to these classes because they're more aligned to, again, having the opportunity where they can make a difference, where they can study something that's directly impacting them, and then having the opportunity to talk about solutions for very real community issues. Um, and one more thing I'll mention, because my mind was also racing while you were chatting. Sometimes I feel that when I talk about the education system, I'm talking about it in its current form. And we talk about knowledge and how it's accepted today. We talk about, I mentioned like the scientific method, like who said the scientific method? Because that's what I was taught. And then I went to school and then I was taught that again. But then I was going through the process and I was like, that's not how this works. Otherwise, we'd solve every problem in the world right now. Cancer wouldn't even exist. We'd just take the 5 steps and we'd be done. But, teaching students how to be complex critical thinkers, I think that that is a skill we can hone for teachers to help students through this time where AI is prolific and there's so much misinformation out there. But at the same time, again, through the book, I think in its early days, it was an acceptance of like, okay, this is the box that we're working in. And then in the second edition, I worked with many more Indigenous leaders to help science teachers kind of break the mold in thinking about science in its current form and asking better questions of why the system is the way it is and who says it needs to be that way moving into the future. And I think that's a really big distinction for me in honoring who we are as humans and being able to understand that we're complex enough to hold in suspension very different ideas. We can have beliefs and values about one thing, but also understand scientific concepts in the same breath. It doesn't have to be either or, right? It can be and. And so I just wanted to also mention that.
Great. Well, let me just mention to everyone who's attending today. So we'll open up the floor for some questions. I've got a bunch more questions. I'll keep talking to Kelley all night, but I want to make some space for the questions that you all are bringing. So you can either do a hand raise thing on the Zoom, or if you just want to put the question in the chat, and then I can either call it, call on you to read it, or I can read it for you if you're not on camera. We can figure it out. So get those questions warmed up. I'll throw one more out here from my sheet here. So you end chapter three with this takeaway, and this kind of relates to what you're talking about, that knowing climate science and teaching about it are two different things. And you get into the climate science. So, we almost always have to talk about the facts of climate change. Can you say more about that difference and what you've seen both in as a teacher, but then also thinking about this issue deeply? Is that related to other similar problems in teaching, or is there something specific about climate change that makes it a thornier problem?
I don't want to get in trouble here, but I feel like I've had a similar question thrown at me just about NGSS, just about next gen. Right? And I've said the same thing with and while training teachers that knowing the next gen framework and what's written on the page is very different than teaching about it. The pedagogical skills needed to teach about it are a whole different craft. And they go hand in hand, right? I mean, without understanding the distinction, how is it any different than me going in front of the classroom and just reading a bunch of scientific facts to them, right? Without any thought. And once I've read it to you, I would assume that you know it, right? And that you care enough to remember it, or that maybe you just memorized it for a test, wrote it down, and then forgot about it when you left, right? I think when we think about pedagogy and the strategies, the reason for why I spend so much time in helping teachers through this book, I was an instructional coach for some time, so the language of the book is definitely framed in that sense of guiding one through a learning process. But when when I think we're supporting teachers, it again, I can't stress this enough. It starts from their beliefs and values about teaching as a whole, but also about the very students in front of them. Because a lot of the professional development that I've led in the past, I've heard teachers say things like, students can't handle this, right? My students can't talk about justice, right? I have 7 and 10-year-olds, two boys. I'm really proud to say that, there are ways that even I've had to navigate with my own children how to talk about climate, especially with the wildfires going on and things like that. But in the past, even when they were 4, we were talking about whether or not some people have access to clean air, because I live next to the 405 freeway, which is this awful freeway that always has traffic, and you could see, I feel like you could see it from space because it's so big and it's so long, but it's like everybody takes it. But at the same time, I remember when one of my kids, one was 4 and the other one was just a baby, we were driving and we passed by the 405 on ramp, and my son was only 4. He didn't know like academic language, but he just said, like, "Hey, mom, didn't you tell me that like the air next to the freeway is like bad air?" I remember him using those words like bad air, and I was like, "Yeah, but like, what about it?" And he was like, "Well, why is there a school right here then?" And I was just like, Well, what does that make you think of?" Right. And he was like, "But the kids have to breathe the bad air. Like, shouldn't they get good air?" And I was just like, "Well, what do you want me to do? You want me to move the school?" And he's like, "Well, no, because that's their school. Like, where would they go? And I was like, okay, well, do you want me to break the freeway? Should I just break the freeway so nobody gets to travel this way anymore? What should I do? Right. And he was only 4, so he was like, I don't know. But I wanted him to understand that solutions are not as easy as we'll just move the school or break the freeway or, make everybody go electric or what have you. It was my way of introducing softly these issues are more complex than we think, but also I love that you at 4 years old notice the difference between what is right and what is wrong when we're thinking about the environment and human health and what people should and shouldn't have access to. There are ways to talk about it because kids already notice what's around them. They're born scientists, right? They're born asking questions and curious about the world. So in my mind, when a teacher says, my kids can't do this, no, I can't talk to my kids about this, I always gently, as a coach, an instructional coach, I push back and I just ask, um, can I ask what is making you think that your kids can't do this? Is it, generally they'll say things like, oh, in the past experiences when I talk about blah, 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 they'll bring up some anecdote. And then I'll ask, is it that we feel that they can't do it, or is it that they actually can't do it? Right? And there's a clear difference between what our expectations are and what reality is. And then at that point, I think a lot of the teachers start questioning, what is it that I believe about this kindergartner? And why do I feel like they can't handle concepts of, plastic pollution in the ocean? Or not even like if a kid walks outside and sees that they're next to a refinery, they have questions about this. And again, I'm a young mom. I didn't know how to talk to my 4-year-old at that time. I didn't know what was right and what was wrong. But I did tell my son as he kept, growing, uh, getting older and asking more questions similar to this nature. I kept telling him, hey, I'm a learner just like you. I don't know all the answers, but how about we look it up together? I was modeling lifelong learning with him. I wanted him to know that it's okay to not know the answer. But then from there, I took other opportunities like, hey, should I just look at any website? Oh, look at this one. This is the first one that popped up. Should I just click on that one and just believe anything it says? Right. So then there were other opportunities to build in critical media literacy and, conversations of skills that they should have as they navigate this very techie world. Um, I just feel like it goes back to beliefs and values and thinking through and questioning why we take the actions we take. And if that's again based on our own perception of what kids can or can't do.
Thanks. We've got some questions in chat, and we actually have a former book chat guest, Molly. Uh, you want to pop on and ask your question, or shall
Sure.
I? Okay.
I'm eating dinner, but this is great, Kelly. I really appreciate this. So, I've done some research in climate change beliefs as well, and thinking about the difference between espoused beliefs and teaching practices. So when a teacher maybe holds certain beliefs, but does not act on those beliefs within their classrooms, maybe you could talk a little bit about that, and if that's something you've worked with.
Yeah, and I think, and again, I don't want to discount that there's a wide variety of teachers, right? You're going to have teachers that go above and beyond just to recognize them. And then also you have teachers that are just not interested. I've definitely supported the gamut. And so I think when you're thinking about teachers that, and may I ask for a clarification, does it matter either way, as in a teacher feels that that climate education is essential to cover, but they are not taking action, or the opposite in that they feel that climate education has no place in a classroom, but they're forced to then teach it?
Well, I guess it probably can go both ways, and I'm sure there's a lot. The work that I've looked at, how I've looked at this, is that teachers find climate education and climate science worthy of instruction, but yet don't practice it because of fear from backlash from administrators or stakeholders, or lack of information.
Yeah, and I always struggle between thinking about the best approach for supporting teachers that I feel like have this challenge. I feel like the best way to approach it first is to tackle what's going on with the system that is creating the challenge. So in my work, I work with a lot of superintendents. I work with a lot of principals. I get the opportunity to train principals. We do a lot of learning walks together. So along with supporting their teachers, where I've had school districts adopt the book. So all the science teachers, and I don't know why it's just limited to science, maybe because of the title, but really we should, just disclaimer, we should take an interdisciplinary approach. But when all science teachers are reading it and then they all begin to teach together, I go on learning walks with principals because the teachers need support at every level to enact this. What happens is you get a teacher who's bought in, who then puts themselves out there, begins to teach lessons, begins to pilot lessons with other colleagues that are doing this, and then a principal who goes door to door and then says, "You're taking too long to elicit questions. I don't see how this is related to instruction, like good use of instructional time. It's been 20 minutes and you're still asking, what is the anchoring phenomenon?" There's a mismatch in how then teachers are trained and then how they're held accountable by the very individuals that are meant to essentially provide them feedback throughout the year. So for me, a systems approach is really important. Now, directly for that teacher, of course, working with school districts where I have to, I shouldn't say have to, but I get that privilege of working with the whole team of of science teachers in one department. Yes, they're definitely all over the place in that some are cheerleaders for the work, which is why likely I'm there. They were the ones who thought this was essential and wanted to bring me into the department to work with the department. And then of that team, you have the opposite end of the spectrum where they don't feel like this is worthy of time, but they will do it anyway. I have found actually that working with the other end, the teachers that are finding this is not worthy of time, but have to do it anyway because their whole department is doing it, is actually much more easier. And the reason being is because approaching it through an instructional coaching lens, approaching it through a co-teaching model, allowing for them to see the students light up, to see that the students are now really engaged with science because it's meaningful, it's directly relevant to them. It allows for the students to feel not only more empowered, but there's a power shift that's changing in the classroom in the ways that we're saying need to happen for climate instruction to activate student agency. It's beyond just rote memorization and talking at students. The way that we are sharing about how pedagogy needs to shift in a classroom allows for the students to take on a different role and to feel more powerful in thinking about the solutions and understanding that there are many solutions to the same problem. And then also seeing that their teacher is a learner in the moment is a very humbling experience. So oftentimes, I think when we get to that opportunity where I get to work with those teachers that again are hesitant, don't want to do it, etc., and they see the change, all in all, what we care about is that we support students. That's something that grounds us, whether you believe in climate change or not, or believe it like Santa Claus or not, is besides the point. In the end, when you see your students talking more, engaging more, showing up to class, fully excited, right? Wanting to pursue this outside of class, those are indicators to you that something is going right. And so for those teachers, it has been actually a really wonderful experience turning this around because they can see it and they can feel the change. On the opposite end, I mean, I won't speak more to that because I think that is easier when you have a teacher who's willing but just doesn't have resources or PD time, etc., to like do this well. Then of course, like this additional support needed is really all that it takes to move that forward. And I hope that answers that.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Thanks. We have a couple more questions in the chat. Keep them coming. Chris, would you like to ask your question?
Well, thanks, thanks, Doug, and kia ora. I'm calling in from New Zealand, actually, so lovely to be here, and thanks so much for having me. We're doing a lot of work down here on climate change education too, and I'm just really excited about the sort of things that you're doing, Kelley. So I guess some of the conundrums that we're experiencing here, I'm sure in America as well, is around science teachers trying to teach climate change, but in an interdisciplinary way. How do they therefore work with colleagues in the primary or elementary area? It's not so difficult, but in the secondary area, much, much more difficult because of the siloing of subject areas and things like that. I guess with all your experience, just do you have any wisdom to say what's a really good approach for trying to deal with this and bringing teachers together in secondary schools in particular?
Yeah, and actually, I want to say the last 3 chapters of the book features a lot of that interdisciplinary work that has emerged over the years. I've worked as a science teacher, practitioner, and then now like science educational leader. I've worked with history, social scientists, artists, mathematicians, engineers, physical education teachers. I mean, really, climate is in everything. And I think giving them resources to show them that it's possible in a meaningful way really helps. I have colleagues that are doing some great research right now out of Berkeley that's tying together history, social science, and science. So I'm on their advisory board. And it's a 3-year study, but they're bringing teacher leaders together to begin to integrate in lesson plan. And from personal experiences as well, working with a history social science director out in UC or at UC Davis, the learning, like the light bulb moments happened for me when I shared, hey, this is what I'm accountable for teaching, right? If I'm a chemistry teacher, I have to cover this topic. When I cover this topic, though, I'm not sure if this is the best approach to it or if I'm using language that is interdisciplinary. This has happened multiple times where in chemistry I'll teach math concepts, but because we don't work with like our math colleagues, we may be using like they use the words like inverse operation and we use different terms to describe the same thing, and then the kids go from one class to the other and get confused. So I feel like the same happened with our history social science colleagues, and so that was how the redlining lesson was born, where I shared, hey, I want to teach about thinking about the role of trees and tree canopy coverage and human health, and also making it complex because here in California, it turns out a lot of the trees are non-native species. And actually, we found in California through looking at the old engineering plans, per the recommendation of my history social science colleague, a lot of the shrubs that were planted here in Los Angeles actually emit a lot of VOCs, which are harmful to humans as we are, passing through, et cetera, on top of the air pollution, on top of the car traffic, all the things. And so it was interesting because I was learning so much about the history of this place that I didn't think was relevant before. But then I started to realize, just talking about it to a colleague and sharing, hey, this is what I need to teach. These are the main concepts I need to cover. And then hearing her say, oh, in 11th grade, we also have to cover, this topic. I can see how these two merge. She educated me, I educated her. And then from there, we were able to think through a through line that was complex enough and multi-day that allowed for teachers to dive in. That's one anecdote, yes, but I know that there are ongoing studies of how different subjects are coming together. We had a grant out of the Math and Science, a Math and Science Foundation, where we tried different things as well. We used a program called Desmos. It's new for science teachers, but for math teachers, it's everything. So we used this free program called Desmos, and I didn't know anything about data science and how to integrate it, but what I shared was, hey, in biology, they have to teach about invasive species. And so my math colleague said, ooh, I know, we can actually use Desmos to track local invasive species and show with the current data how they have proliferated over time, and then start asking, like as a scientist, you can get them to ask questions about why they think that's happening, why that's important to know, what are other factors we need to consider. We did another one on carrying capacity with mountain lions here locally, and how they were impacted by the new highways that were built. We did another one on deforestation versus reforestation rates, because we wanted students to see that it's not just that if we cut down these ancient trees, that we should just reforest, and that will be part of the solution, because we wanted them to understand carbon, right? And carbon emissions, and then also ancient carbon. And so again, my point here is that there are ways, and definitely throughout every subject, there's a connection, but there's no straight answer in that. The best ways we found so far: work with your teacher leaders, those that are the champions for the work. And then from there, get them, right, to bring along colleagues to try and pilot with them. That's the only way to build capacity that we've found so far is helpful. But I haven't yet found a subject where not even women gender studies, like we've connected everywhere with every subject. I haven't found a subject yet, not finance. We just worked with a real estate agent to talk about the real estate market and climate change impacts. There's no subject out there that it doesn't relate to, but in terms of approach with teachers, you have to work with the ones that are most willing first, and then from there build their capacity to be the teacher leaders at their sites to then continue to branch out.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I think our next question is from Yadana. Please correct my pronunciation if I had it wrong. Okay.
Hi there. Thanks so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Zooming in from Brooklyn, New York. Hi, Kelly. I think there's probably a better way to phrase my question. I really appreciate how you kind of start your book off as somebody who works daily with teachers in their perspective, and kind of also maybe different ways of thinking about your own practice, even in like just the beginning of the book. And also what you said now about how there are going to be multiple solutions. So I think that there's this sort of tension between what is expected and kind of broadly desired. All teachers must be doing this. Integration must look like this. This sort of like policy top-down level, this has to magically happen. At the same time, what we're seeing are these sort of like beautiful case studies of teachers who are really connecting well with their communities or schools or classrooms and doing these kind of lovely projects that have real relevance. So I guess I'm kind of wondering how do you reflect on that? Do you even see it as a tension? It's something that, sort of I think a lot of folks are navigating, and teachers are also navigating. And that sort of secondary piece is, how are we judging these things? Are we going to judge them based on whether they're copy and paste in what is desired in the top-down kind of framing, or are we going to be judging them on their actual true relevance, or in and around the lived experiences of the students and the teachers?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. When I was leading Eclipse, just a little background on that organization. I mean, truly incredible, but it's one of the first organizations that connects every public university across one state, along with a vast network of community partners to advance climate, environmental literacy, justice, and action. So 33 university campuses, every UC, every CSU, and tackling it from a regional-based effort. Because we knew that Northern California is very different than Southern, which is very different than Central. But also, turns out that in Southern California, Los Angeles is very different than Orange County. And even within Orange County, you have very conservative areas, but then you also have areas that I want to say are a little bit more liberal. So their approaches are very different. I asked myself a similar question when we were bringing up this initiative, and how we would be able to fulfill on this promise to ensure that we graduate every high school senior as climate and environmentally literate, as informed decision makers, right? If we know that what works in one place isn't going to work in another, how can we then say this is the climate lesson plan that everybody should adopt, right? So I say that to say that what we've discovered in the years of working with so many incredible researchers and field leaders is a framework that I included in the second edition of the book. And that framework looks at key components to teaching about climate change in the most culturally relevant and responsive way possible. Because without that, it's not going to be relevant to students, right? You can talk about, I mean, truth be told, when I taught in Los Angeles and my biology teachers, I was department chair at the time, overseeing 21 science teachers in one school. That's how big our school was in the inner city. And we were responsible for teaching this. When the biology teachers were talking about the extinction rates of the neighboring mountain lions and what was happening to them, and I was observing these classrooms, kind of go through the lessons, students were saying things like, where is this place? And the teacher would say, Santa Monica is only 20 minutes from you. You've never been to Santa Monica? And they were like, no. Not only have I never been there, but I don't care about mountain lions. And so I just remember the kids were just very brutally honest about like what issues they cared about and what was near and dear to them. So we reframed it. I said, what if the phenomenon wasn't about the mountain lion and that was more of an investigative phenomenon to a larger anchoring phenomenon? What if it was really about thinking about like something like as big as the sixth mass extinction? This is a case study of one species that is impacted by humans that we are going to uncover together. But it's because there is a larger problem that I am trying to share with you all through this smaller case study. So it then goes beyond, this is an individual mountain lion problem to there's a systemic problem here. And as an individual, I want to know what I can do about that, right? And so I say all that to say, when we're thinking about, these approaches and supporting teachers in different ways, the 6 key paradigm shifts that were uncovered through the framework that I now have placed into the 2nd edition is key. Making sure A, it's culturally relevant and responsible, right? B, that it activates agency, because kids these days want to do something about it. I found, which I thought was very interesting, a lot of the researchers across our UC CSU system kept saying when they were giving feedback on the framework development, so over 120 leaders in our own state helped to put that together. They said things like, hey, Kelley, I think that these paradigm shifts probably they're less for students than they are for the adults that teach the students, because the students, there's no question about climate change. There's no paradigm shift needed for whether or not they believe in it or not. They're at the stage right now where they want action. They want to learn about it. They want opportunities to talk about it and to do something. So let's be clear that these paradigm shifts are really for the teachers in their lives and those that support, like caregivers, et cetera, that support them. And so there are a number of things, but centering on Indigenous knowledge and community wealth of information. I could go on intersectional approaches, interdisciplinary approaches. There are just key components that we know need to take place for this to be transformative. Not just, hey, this is the current system that we're operating in, and we have to work within the house that was already built. What happens if I break a wall? Right? What would that look like? What would go in its place? Right? How would we rebuild it? To dream bigger and better, right? Knowing what we know now about what's needed for climate change education, so that the students can take the action that they so want to take and to continue, I should say, being leaders that they are. I would highly recommend looking at those 6 paradigm shifts. And then we also, along with them, added 7 key lesson plan design components that complement those 6 shifts. So that way we can see within a lesson plan if the components are represented, whether or not they push students to do X, Y, or Z, depending on the paradigm shift that we're talking about. So again, there's no cookie cutter answer. What happens in New York and how we teach it in New York has to be different than what happens in Orange County and Los Angeles, and even different parts of Los Angeles, but there are design components that should be the same. For instance, how we position students in a classroom as passive learners versus those that are capable of also guiding and driving a lesson. That should be something that all teachers in every subject thinks about, how they think about it. When we think about discourse in a classroom, I think that is something, again, every teacher needs to think about, but those are pedagogical moves that we know are needed. Whether those shifts happen or not, again, it goes back to the teacher's beliefs and values about whether or not they've even been able to give the time to reflect on the role of schooling and their role within schooling, and understanding the power and privileges that they have in that role. I will tell you, like a lot of the PDI lead, I meet teachers over and over and over again, and every time they always say the same, which is like, I almost never get a chance to reflect on this. I'm so busy doing the day-to-day, I don't have an opportunity to even think about these bigger questions you're asking me. And now that you're asking me, it's like a window has shattered and I can't I can't stop thinking about it, but not that I have answers for them, but at least now they're on this journey of self-reflection and understanding that their decisions have real impact. Not that that they didn't recognize that before, but strictly speaking about climate change, whether they omit or include it has very real impact for students at this point.
Thank you. We have another question.
you.
Thank you, Donna. I appreciate your question. Michelle. Hi, Michelle.
I think you just answered my question, actually, Kelley. I took a hiatus from science teaching and was able to adapt a more asset-aligned pedagogy, and I'm returning to the classroom now. And we are in our climate storyline, about to do our climate change storyline. And I'm really grappling with my colleagues' interest in doing something that's not as relevant to students' lives as something that's more place-based or more culturally responsive. So I think what I heard was, yeah, culturally responsive, something that is place-based and directly impacts students is more useful. I think it is in conflict with the way we do ambitious science teaching, which we separate out carefully to make sure we're covering the standards and then working from investigative phenomenon to anchoring phenomenon. But I don't know if you want to speak more about place-based climate change and how do you find those anchoring pieces that capture all the sub pieces you need to cover the standards and the concepts while still making it culturally responsive and something that would drive that agency and interest for students to really be empowered.
Oh, Michelle, I have so much I want to say to you. First, I think the fact that you're thinking of this is so important and so powerful because you recognize your own agency as an educator in the classroom to carefully and intentionally think this through. And I think that's a lot of that time for teachers is missing where they think, I have to cover XYZ standards. I don't have time for, blah, 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 because there's so many other things, IEP meetings, after school things, like all the things. But when you take a second to really think about it, you have so much power and privilege to be able to honor students in this way. And exactly what you just shared, I've had similar experiences with my own colleagues and with training teachers as well. And the first question I always ask is, who says we need to do it that way? Like, just say that out loud. I just want to hear it. Who says that we have to do it this way? And most often when we go down that train of thinking, the teachers get to the point, they always get stuck. They're like, but the standards. And I'm like, yes, but the standards are high. You can interpret them in such a number of ways, but you've interpreted it this way. So talk to me more about that, right? So when you are dissecting the frameworks, you took this from it and then you're running it in this way. But who says you can't change it without also fulfilling the same requirements that you need? And then we go deeper. I would even ask colleagues and teachers, what's the main goal of the lesson? Like at the end, what do we really want them to A, do, B, know, right? And C, remember long after their time with us. And I think that when you ask those deeper questions, it helps your colleagues to really say what their internal belief systems are out loud, right? Like, I believe that they need to be prepared for the NGSS exam. All right, cool. I think that's important too. However, can we do that, but also go about it this way? Can't we do both? Right? I just think that asking those deeper questions of like, why do we feel this way about students? I mean, I've had so many chemistry colleagues because I teach in inner city that will say to me, we should cut all the math out of chemistry. They can't do it, which is not true. That's not true. I will say that. And I always push back with, and we is again a coaching term. I don't feel this way, but like, why do we feel this way that kids can't do the math in chemistry or physics? Well, they always score terribly, da da da. And I was like, okay, so I get that our previous experience are that students have hardships and challenges in taking on this concept, but what other scaffolds can we try? Because when I'm teaching kids in this way, I found success doing it, blah, 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 right? And so I feel like if you ask those deeper questions, it will help to yield the deeper conversation And it may help them to have that reflection point in which probably they don't often get. But you're right there. You're right there. You're pushing the bounds. And I'm so grateful to hear what you just shared. Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks, Michelle. Okay, we're entering the speed round. We're going to get you out at the top of the hour because Kelley's got a hard out at the hour. So we have 2 questions left, and both are asking for examples. So Jeannie asks questions about district adopted science texts. For those districts that have outdated texts, what curriculum aligns well with your research for 7th and 8th grade? And Jiva is asking, would you have an example of how you might have supported science teachers in talking about taking action in collective terms versus individual actions?
Oh, Jeannie, I don't know if I'm saying your name right. I laughed at your question because I helped several districts with their textbook adoption process and talk about how people's values and beliefs come out in that moment for what they feel is needed for all students. But in the end, it's meant to be a resource. It's not meant to be, something that you teach from beginning to end. I don't think any textbook is meant to be used in that way, only because remember the nature of a textbook is it's meant to be universal. Having worked with publishers as well, I'm well aware of the corporate money driven side of things, and making it universal means that, it needs to be widely adopted so that they can sell the book. So it can never be the full resource you use for a classroom. But there are a wide variety of resources. So please reach out. I can share ones that the schools that I've worked with have adopted in the past. They're good starts, but with teachers, already, if you want to be culturally relevant and responsive, we're going to have to supplement as we continue through. And then let's see.
Question about taking action in
Oh,
collective.
yes. Jiva, I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong, but one of the examples that I love hearing about and I love sharing now is I worked with incredible partners at Monterey Bay Aquarium, and they created a lab for teachers to think about systems thinking, so that collective action approach versus individual blame and shame, and helping students to move beyond that. I love that when they were thinking about universal design for learning and, again, teaching students about the systems thinking approach, the training that they had teachers go through over weeks and weeks of time, which was, it's something that I can definitely share because, again, they're an incredible resource, yielded results in one of the 2nd grade classes that I remember that they were sharing. A teacher was talking about, so this teacher came through this training series and was thinking through collective action and what does it mean for 2nd graders? Like, how do I teach this to a 2nd grade class without leaning too far into justice, because that might be a gray area for some teachers, especially teaching the little ones where they're learning it themselves. And she said that the kids were coming in from PE and they were mad at one particular kid because I guess he kept hogging the ball. And then other kids couldn't play with it. It was a whole thing. They were all like just so upset at this one kid. And so she was teaching them this process of understanding a collective problem versus an individual problem. And she asked the kids, okay, let's get some data and research more about this issue. So she asked the kids to go collect data on how many balls the school handed out at lunch every day. And then she asked them to collect data on how many kids were out at lunch every day at that time when the balls were then released. And the kids came back after some time and they realized that the school was only handing out 3 balls to like hundreds of kids. So then she asked them, so I'm just going to call him Jacob. Is this really Jacob's fault here that you're not getting to play with the ball? Or is there a larger systems issue here where the school is not providing enough materials for all of you to have some equitable access to playtime? And then the kids right there, light bulb moments were going off because then they realized, oh, wait, it's not Jacob. Jacob is part of the same system we're part of as well. We need to ask better questions and we need to advocate for a systems change, and then hence more balls at recess. But the point is, I feel like when we think about collective action, even at young ages versus high school ages, helping the students to understand that It's not about shaming or blaming at an individual level, but understanding that their collective action, yes, has large impact. They have to understand it through a systems thinking approach. Otherwise, they're not going to know how littering on the street has any impact on microplastics in the air, or why microplastics are now found in our blood, or why there's plastic literally all over the ocean. There's no connection to them. Therefore, how would then their belief system allow for them to take meaningful action to then stop doing the thing? And so I feel like a systems thinking approach is essential as you're designing those storylines. They need to understand their individual role, but they also need to understand how that role relates to a larger, more impactful role as well, right? Because again, people make up those systems, and therefore we can change those very systems as well.
Well, thank you, Kelley. That's a wonderful place to end with that story of collective, both information gathering and action. I really want to highly recommend Kelley's book, Teaching Climate Change for grades 6 through 12, with the coffee beans on the front. And Kelley, I just want to say thank you. We only it was an hour, but we only really scratched the surface of all the resources that are there in this book. And I just want to just tell people like how many entry points there are wherever you are in thinking about climate change, either just understanding it yourself or teaching it to others. There's so much in this book, and I'm really hopeful about it, and I'm glad you wrote it, and I'm really grateful that you were with us today to talk to our Science Teaching and Learning SIG, and so thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Doug. Keep in touch, everyone. Thank you. Have a great night.